Hello and welcome. My name is Rob Clancy. I'm a pre-sales engineer here at SUSE. Today's session we're going to look at managing Kubernetes and K3s edge clusters with Rancher. During the session, which will be mainly demo driven, we're going to look at how we can manage and create Kubernetes clusters with Rancher. We're going to delve into the Rancher catalog, look at some of the services and applications that are out the box. Then we're going to deploy a workload. We're actually going to deploy monitoring with Grafana and Prometheus across a cluster that we create. Then we're going to create a K3s edge cluster and then use Rancher to import that cluster. So the first thing we're going to look at is the management of clusters and the creation of clusters using Rancher. What you can see in front of you is the Rancher cluster dashboard, which will show all the clusters that are under management by Rancher itself. First thing we're going to do is look at our options to either import a cluster or create a cluster and the options around that. So I'm going to click on Add Cluster, and what you can see now is the number of different options. I'll just explain what the options are here. So if you already have an existing Kubernetes cluster anywhere else and you want to import that and use and have Rancher manage that, these are a couple of options that you could do. There's one set up directly for EKS, but if there was, let's say, in Azure or somewhere else, then we can use the other clusters to create that import mechanism. Next one is if you've got some existing on-prem clusters, on-prem infrastructure that you actually want Rancher to then go and install Kubernetes on top of that. That's an option there. The next two options are where we can create the infrastructure itself and then have Rancher install Kubernetes on top of that and then bring it under management. The last option here is if you wanted to create a Kubernetes cluster that's hosted by one of the hyperscalers such as Amazon or Azure or Google. So what we're going to look at is we're going to use Rancher first of all to go into AWS and create some infrastructure. Rancher will do that, and then also in the next stage Rancher will go in and install, create a cluster on top of that using the RKE engine within Rancher itself. And then Rancher will take that cluster under management. You'll see that in that cluster dashboard we mentioned. So now we're going to create a Kubernetes cluster within Amazon using Rancher. So I will just put some default information in. I'll give it a name, call it demo cluster. And now we're going to define what the nodes look like, and we're going to have Rancher stand those nodes up. So I am going to add a few more nodes. I'm going to call the first node I'll call it node etcd. I have one of those, and then here within Rancher itself, you have the ability to create templates of what you would like a node to look like. I've already created that, so I'm going to use a predefined node, a template for that node, and then I'm going to tell Rancher what I want it to do with that node, and I want it to just be the etcd cluster. And then the next node I'm going to call the control plane, the control cluster, and I'm just going to have the control element on there. And then the next one I'm going to call it the worker nodes, worker. And what I will do on that is I will have 3 of those, or 2, and I will set it to worker node there. So now I'm telling Rancher what I want my node to look like. Next thing is I need to tell Rancher what I would like the Kubernetes cluster to, a version of the Kubernetes, and what I would like the cluster to be like. And you get a number of options down here in terms of how you want that cluster to look like. You can go in and, Rancher supports any CNCF certified cluster out there. You can select what version. As you can see, 120 is the default there. And then you can go down. There's some various configurations that you can set. I'm not going to go into all of them. But what I am going to do is one of the very pertinent points about Rancher itself is its ability to create templates, and I've already created a template for what I would like a Kubernetes cluster to look like. And the template enables me to have a defined standard that I can then use again and again and again, or enforce a team or an individual or a group to use this approved cluster type. So I've selected, using existing RKE template, I've selected that template that I created previously, and what it will now do is it will inherit all those configuration settings that I put, and it will put them all into there. And then it is as simple as that. And now I then go and create. Now what will happen is Rancher will now go and look to provision that cluster in AWS, and you can see the nodes that it's going to create, and we'll give that a short while to build. But behind the background, in order to do that, what I've already done, just to explain, what I've already done is within Rancher, I've given the cloud credentials so Rancher knows how to connect to my account within AWS, and I've given it the access key and the secret keys, so it can go and talk to AWS and create that cluster. Now what we can see with that cluster that we've just gone and created, we can see Rancher giving us some information in terms of what's happening with that cluster, where it is in terms of building the cluster. So it's feeding back information all the time to us all the time. Obviously this information is available from the various logs as well. But if I just click in to show you what's happening, these are the nodes, the actual nodes within an EC2 node within AWS itself. So Rancher has already gone and stood those nodes up, and is now working through deploying Kubernetes and waiting for it all to become active. So within the next few minutes, what we'll find is that cluster will become active, and then we'll be able to then deploy some additional workloads into that cluster itself. So as we can see now, that demo cluster we've created has been fully provisioned. Just to summarize, we configured Rancher to go and stand up the infrastructure itself, then to install a version of Kubernetes, and then to take it under management. And it's done all those three tasks. What we can see now, there is a number of nodes. So if we click into that, we can see the actual nodes that have been created. And if we want to scale these nodes now, so if we wanted to provision another worker node, we simply click on that, and now Rancher will do exactly the same. It will start to provision the infrastructure, the node, the EC2 node itself. Then it will start to install that version of Kubernetes that we mentioned, and then start to bring that under, again, it will just expand the cluster and bring it under management. So we'll leave that run for a second, and then the next thing we're going to do once that's fully provisioned is to go and take a workload, and we're then going to deploy a workload onto that newly created cluster. So as we can now see, the demo cluster is fully active after we scaled up an additional worker node. So we now have 5 nodes. Now what we're going to do is go in and deploy a workload on top of this newly created cluster. And to do that, I'm going to go into the Explorer view for that particular cluster we've created. And what it will present us with when we first go in is a cluster dashboard where we can get detailed information about the cluster itself, such as the deployments, pods, anything, replica sets, namespaces regarding the actual cluster itself. What we're going to do is, in order to deploy the workload, we're going to move over to the apps and marketplace within Rancher itself, excuse me. And what we can see here is a number of services or applications that we can install from the catalog. If we wanted to extend this catalog, so pull in some additional third-party Helm charts, then we can do that from the Rancher catalog itself. We just need to go into the chart repository and create another integration to that various GitHub repository and pull that in, and then those applications or services will then be available within the catalog itself. It's very easy to extend that. Excuse me. So first of all, we're going to deploy a monitoring workload onto that newly created cluster that we created in AWS. So let's go ahead and install monitoring. We click on that. Now we have a number of options here, from version, selecting a version, to a number of configuration options that are surfaced to us from the Helm chart itself, where you can enable, disable as you see fit. We're not going to change any of those for the purposes of this demo. All we're going to do is install it, then Rancher will come back and give us an update on that progress as it happens. So now I've just clicked install, and what will happen is Rancher, as I say, Rancher will come back and it will show us progress of that installation. Once that application, that monitoring app is installed on the newly created cluster that we created, we'll be able to launch into that application and see it running. As you can see, monitoring is now fully deployed by Rancher. So let's dig a bit deeper into monitoring. Again, it's Grafana and Prometheus that's been deployed by Rancher, which is available from when you install Rancher from the catalog itself. So if we click into Grafana and look at the dashboards, we can see the monitoring application workload now deployed across the cluster, and it's pulling back metrics about the cluster itself, but that can be extended to look at the workloads that are running within that cluster, not just about the cluster itself. So the next step is to look at K3s and the creation of a K3s cluster, and then using Rancher to import that cluster and bring it under management. So let's go ahead and create a K3s cluster and then import it into Rancher. So first of all, for those not familiar with K3s, K3s is a lightweight certified Kubernetes distribution, which is ideal for edge IoT computing. It's extremely easy to create a K3s cluster, and this website obviously details more information about that. What I'm going to do is copy the command there, and now I'm going to go to an instance that I've created on EC2, and I'm going to log into that, run the command, and then create the K3s cluster, log into that, we'll see that cluster, and then I'm going to import it into Rancher. So now I'm going to log into, well, I've already logged into the node itself. I'm going to run the command that I copied earlier to install K3s on that node. And what we will see is K3s be installed. And that was it. It's complete. K3s is now installed. Now what we'll do is use Rancher to import that K3s cluster and take it under management by Rancher. So just to confirm that K3s is fully installed, I've just run the K3s command, and as you can see, it's now up and running. So now let's go ahead and import that K3s cluster into Rancher and take it under management. So we go into add a cluster, I'll call it K3s. There are some options here that we can set, but I'm not going to use any of them, just create. Now what we'll get is a series of commands, so I'll just copy this command here. And this command I then take and run against the K3s cluster. So if I do that, then what will happen now is that cluster will now start to, you can see that cluster is imported. I've created that. Now what's happening is that cluster is now being imported into Rancher, and it will go through a series of steps of taking that under management. So as we can see, it's now active and been fully imported by Rancher. What we do have is, you can see that there's one node that's been discovered. And if I click into the cluster itself, we can go down and look at that particular node within that cluster itself, or I can go into the Cluster Explorer as we have previously and look at the K3s cluster that we just imported. So that concludes the demo. Just to summarize, we've been through a number of tasks with Rancher in terms of creating clusters, then deploying workloads on those clusters, also the creation of a K3s cluster, and then importing that cluster and bring it under management with Rancher. Thank you.